Um, uh, Before I begin this talk on Denise Chaila, Denise Chaila, and the pleasures of being here, focusing particularly on her song and video, Ansha, I'd like to thank my friend Noelia Borges for inviting me to this symposium. It's a pleasure to be here. I should warn you that I'm not an expert in Irish studies, but I do write on popular music, and Noelia sent me 3 pieces of music and invited me to comment on them. The first 2 were examples of popular or pop Irish folk song, and the third was this song, Ansha by Denise Chaila. I don't really know much about Irish pop or folk songs, but I have written on rap music, so I chose the latter. I also chose it because I really like it, and like many other examples of her work too. I also have Irish connections insofar as I have a partnership, a work partnership, not a romantic one, with an Irish artist called Ida Connell in a culinary art project called Mouth. We work frequently with other Irish artists, for example, Emma Roberts, Celia Bulow, and Jessie Presley-Jones. The theme of food and hospitality is, of course, partly bound up with the notion of here, or the present, or presence in the sense of gifts, a connection illustrated by the fact that Ansha is also the name of a bar in Camden Street in Dublin. So that's important to remember. I'll also mention another bar later. So cheers. Speaking of bars, it's a pleasure to be here. But where is here? Ansha, as you know, is the Irish word for here and now, or present and correct. In Ireland, it's used as the response to a kind of roll call, such as you would have at school or in a military parade. Are we all here and now? Where is here and where is now? We all seem to be virtually present and at the same time, but in very different places and very different times. Half a world away at a different time of day. For me, it's 5:15. For you, I think it's 2:15. Is that the same time? Different times and places. Perhaps if we all shout, Ansha, we'll feel better, we'll be together. So this ritual of the roll call is important to remember when considering Chaila's song, since the song itself takes the form of a kind of punctuating call and response, and Ansha is repeated throughout. There's also a perhaps unintentional reference to a famous poem by the same name by Paul Muldoon. In fact, I was led to Muldoon's poem while researching Chaila's rap. Now I want to look at both these texts that are both called Ansha. And since I read the Muldoon poem after I heard Chaila's song and watched the video, I want us to read the former in the light of the latter. In case you don't know, Denise Chaila is a Zambian Irish rapper, singer, poet, grime and hip hop artist from Limerick. Chaila began performing on the Limerick music scene in 2012. She released her debut EP. Can you go back to the poem, Lara? Okay, I'm going to talk about the poems shortly. Thank you. I'm just filling in some facts. The video for copyright reasons, but I would ask people present to look at it. I will describe it in detail later. But we can see the poem, so I'm going to read through the poem and then we'll look at how Chaila's rap kind of revisits this scene in a very, very different way, but there are connections. So this is Ansha by Paul Muldoon. When the master was calling the roll at the primary school in college lands, you were meant to call back Ansha and raise your hand as your name occurred. Ansha meaning here and now, all present and correct, was the first word of Irish I spoke. The last name on the ledger belonged to Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward and was followed, as often as not, by silence, knowing looks, a nod and a wink, the master's droll, and where's our little ward of court? I remember the first time he came back. The master had sent him out along the hedges to weigh up for himself and cut a stick with which he would be beaten. After a while, nothing was spoken. He would arrive, as a matter of course, with an ash plant, a sally rod, or finally the hazel wand he had whittled down to a whiplash, its twist of red and yellow lacquers sanded and polished, and altogether so delicately wrought that he had engraved his initials on it. I last met Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward in a pub just over the Irish border. He was living in the open, in a secret camp on the other side of the mountain. He was fighting for Ireland, making things happen. And he told me, Joe Ward, of how he had risen through the ranks to quartermaster, commandant, how every morning at parade, his volunteers would call back, Ansha, and raise their hands as their names occurred. So I'm sure there are plenty of sophisticated literary interpretations of this poem, which I'm also sure would be very worthwhile pursuing. But I want to restrict myself to a common perception of the poem, represented by a journalist from the Irish Times, which points to a couple of aspects that might also be common with Chyla's version. The journalist Frank McNally is reporting on a festival at the Electric Picnic in 2014, but finds himself at a poetry reading where, amid the racket from all the music stages, Paul Muldoon is performing one of what McNally calls his catchier numbers. This is Ansha. Perhaps Chyla was at the festival too and caught the number herself. McNally suggests that the poem is about the cyclicality of violence. And in his newspaper piece, he offers a short reading, essentially replaying the narrative in which the corporal punishment the character Ward receives for not being present at a school in the north, possibly in Armagh, is seen as the cause for his joining of the Irish Republican Army, and the ironic repetition of the roll call during the military parades that he commands. Ironic because the same Irish word is the stake in both the north and the south of Ireland and Irish identity and commitment at the cost of either punishment or death. It suggests that people, school kids, soldiers, through bearing this old word and entering into presence through its utterance, share an Irish identity, yet are not the same, depending on their relation to the UK, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland is part of the UK. The two elements of this poem that I want to mention are first, the line when the poet says that Ansha was the first word of Irish I spoke. And the second, the time and detail he spends on Joe Ward's fashioning of the canes he is going to be beaten with for not being there and not saying it. The first point tells us that the poet Muldoon is habitually taught in English and that the Irish word ansha is foreign to him. One might even say that to the Ireland evoked by this old word, he is a foreigner, an immigrant. I expect that this is broadly the case with most Irish children taught in the 20th and the 21st centuries, including Denise Chyla. Assuming that King's Hospital Secondary School in Palmerston, where Denise Chyla was taught in Limerick, assuming that they practice the same kind of roll call, I understand it's common throughout Ireland, it's likely that Ansha is the first Irish word that she uttered, or perhaps the first word she uttered in public. I mean, Irish words are, of course, all over the place, all over the signage in Ireland. The first Irish word she uttered that designated her presence in Ireland in a real, symbolic, and perhaps even mythical sense. Clearly, if you look at the video, it's something that stirred her imagination. We get real, symbolic, and mythical dimensions involved in that video, as it is punctuated by this phrase, Ansha. Okay, the second point is similar. What substitutes for Ward not being there and not saying the word is the pain of the beating that he takes. But not just that, there's also the painstaking way he fashions each generation of Cain for the master to beat him, and the seemingly perverse enjoyment that he takes in it. He would arrive as a matter of course with an ash plant, a sally rod, or finally the hazel wand he had whittled down to a whiplash. Its twist of red and yellow lacquers, sanded and polished, and altogether so delicately wrought that he's engraved his initials on it. Even engraves his own initials on the cane that's going to beat him. So there's clearly enjoyment in the delicate craftsmanship here that's registered in the work that he's putting in, that is quite extra to what is functionally required. And through this identification, through signing the cane, I suggest kind of perverse enjoyment in a quite technical sense. In psychoanalysis, perversion is defined as the desire to be the instrument or the object of the other's enjoyment. If you're a sadist, you desire to be the instrument. If you're a masochist, you want to be the object. And here it's kind of both. I don't think that Ward is interested in whether the master is getting off on beating him or not. It's not about the master, but about the word that causes the instrument, the cane that bears his name, to beat his body, the object that kind of suffers from it, but also perhaps clearly takes some kind of enjoyment in that suffering. The other, as they say in psychoanalysis, is represented by the word that is the cause of the beating, ansha. Ultimately, desire is bound to the word. Ward wants to suffer from the word and be its instrument. We might also note here the slight homonym or half rhyme between word and ward, the name of the boy, his name that the cane bears. There's also the meaning of the word that is played on ironically by the master. Where is our little ward of court? A ward is someone under the protection or control of a governing authority and its discourse. Here, the master's discourse. To sum up then, we're all initially foreign to this discourse of the master that binds us together in the here and now, in the effectively timeless signifier, ansha. This signifier is thus the instrument of both pleasure, the pleasure of being together, but also pain, the pain of separation or difference that polices the boundary of our togetherness in the punishment of Ward, the outsider. In the image of Ward, this pleasure and pain is inextricably linked in the experience of the community of the school. Can move to the next slide. Excellent. I don't know if Denise Chaila had any similar formed experiences at school. She wasn't beaten. I hope corporal punishment has vanished from Irish schools. I don't know, actually. Let's hope she wasn't beaten, but it seems she was probably bullied. Chaila has two problems about her experience in Ireland that I would assume derive from school. The first is the inability or unwillingness of her classmates, neighbours and colleagues to pronounce her name properly. On her Twitter account, she tries to give us all some help there so that we don't repeat the trauma. Chaila, like chai tea, but with la at the end, chai la. She even has a song about this called Chaila, and there are some quotes from it. My name's not that hard to pronounce. Pre-K, it's not profound. C-H-A-I-L-A. Sound the words out. It's not Chile. It's not Chilala. It's not a hard pill to swallow. Chaili or Chalia, Chia, Chilla, Dilla. That's not my name. Say my name. Can we have another slide, please? Her other problem, documented in her first single, a poem called Dual Citizenship, is the fact that she's continually being asked, where are you from originally? I understand Rebecca is going to be talking about dual citizenship tomorrow, so I'm not going to dwell on it here. But Chaila has said that it's this question that is most fundamental to her work. There's actually a YouTube clip of her saying this, which you can find. The question, where are you from originally, of course, depends upon the assumption that you are not from here. And that assumption is based on the way she looks and the way she sounds. It's a question that requires, as its condition, a prior exclusion. You may be here, but you're not from here. You'll never be ansha, because this Irish word cannot possibly refer to you in the way that it applies to someone with an Irish name, for example, or traditional Irish complexion. You may be granted Irish citizenship, but you'll never be Irish. For a speaker of English, of course, Irish names look foreign, but don't sound foreign because different letters are used to form basically the same sounding names. Irish names frequently have English equivalents, no doubt because many have been anglicised in the past. And I assume that it is not simply a question of predetermined family heritage and tribal loyalty. The choice, where it is sometimes the choice of an Irish name over its English equivalent, is to register a commitment to the Irish language and to affirm that one is Irish and not English, which is understandable and no doubt commendable, but it puts someone like Denise Chaila in a spot, a bothersome spot that's neither here nor there. So where are you from originally? The question is posed directly in the song. It's repeated a few times and posed directly to the listener, like the repeated challenge to say my name in Chaila. She likes to return the question posed to her and put her interlocutor on the spot, on the same spot as herself. For the listener, does it similarly undermine the confidence of the here and now of Ireland and the Irish? Does it undermine the self-evidence or the self-presence of the Irish language and the Irish name, to which, as Muldoon's poem underscores, all the English-speaking Irish are foreigners, or rather immigrants? Moreover, this is the case with everybody. We all speak the master's discourse, or rather, it speaks us. We are born and we need to learn the names that pre-exist us, the names that are given to us. We need to learn to speak, to read, to get some grasp of the culture and its social and political structures, like family, nation, and so on, that is supposedly ours, and yet pre-exists and is initially foreign to us. This is the fundamental state of the subject in psychoanalysis. The subject as such, defined by its place in the other, is an immigrant. Its place is not defined by the same, given that the other is its only home. For the subject, this foreign country is the country of birth. This status of immigrant puts the identity of the subject in question, leading the subject to seek its identity in groups, people, and nations. So this is the subject of dual citizenship, it seems to me, but I'll pass on that. I'll move on to Ansha. I want to look specifically at the chorus and the final verse, or the coda, if you like. The slide we have here, if you go back to the slide, these are a couple of tweets that Chaila presented some of her work at the National Gallery. And there are some objections to this. While we were in lockdown, Zambia's answer to Lisa was given the keys to the National Gallery with our money to record a song that celebrated learning how to spell her own name. It would be a shame if it got loads of dislikes. It might make her resent us for existing in her own home even more. Do me a favor, go and vote down this video. Irish Liberals are promoting this Zambian woman is Irish. She's been given every platform in Ireland only because of her skin colour. So she's produced some resentment in Ireland. So if we move on to the next slide and then the next slide. So where are you from originally? Yeah, move on. Move on. Okay, good. This is a still from the video and the chorus. So in the video, Chaila initially appears in a kind of contemporary glamorous rap star outfit, like the one in the picture. An interior shot that quickly cuts, however, to an exterior shot with Chaila somewhere that looks like the west coast of Ireland, in sort of faux medieval chainmail, holding a large broadsword. She will subsequently pose with a variety of medieval weapons. The next shot cuts to her crew, done up like characters from Game of Thrones or something similar. Game of Thrones, of course, being produced and filmed for the most part in Northern Ireland. This sets the pattern for the video, which cuts back and forth from Chyla's TV fantasy neo-medieval look to a neo-ancient Egyptian pharaoh look, as she is joined by her co-star Jafaris, who follows suit. Just like the here and now of this symposium, the ansha of the video is mediated by multiple screens, continually displaced across different fantasy scenarios, generated by film, TV, and YouTube. In this way, of course, the visuals support the lyrics that are similarly drawn from popular cultural examples. If you're looking for your Black James Bond, ansha. Spicebox, Taxi by the Centra, ansha. Sailor Moon remixed by Fela, c'est moi. I'm not a queen, I'm a pharaoh, Shah. Your Black James Bond, ansha. Spicebox, Taxi by the Centra, ansha. Sailor Moon remixed by Fela, c'est moi. A female Black James Bond? Why not? James Bond is a fictional character, continually remade, upgraded, and so on. Celtic actors are usually favoured. There's the Scot Sean Connery, the Welsh Timothy Dalton, and of course the Irish Pierce Brosnan, who took the role after he played the IRA operative who took down Bob Hoskins' London Gangster and The Long Good Friday. Do you know what a spice box or a spice bag is? Chyla's lyrics advise us to do a quick Google search later on. So a spice bag or a spicy bag, spice box or spicy box is a fast food dish popular in Ireland inspired by Asian cuisine. It typically consists of deep fried spicy chips, chicken shredded. I think go to the next slide, actually. There's an illustration. Thank you. There we go. It's a spicy bag. According to my friend Ida, the spice box has replaced the curry long tray in Irish society, which itself long ago displaced Irish stew or bacon and cabbage as Ireland's national dish. Other references in Chyla's ansha, drawn from globalized popular culture, follow. The theme to Silver Moon, a Japanese anime that is to be remixed by the late Fela Kuti, the Nigerian inventor of Afrobeat. Ansha. Everything here is an effect of sampling across multiple cultural sites, remixed and remediated. Hip hop and raps are forms that went global decades ago, which doesn't mean this rap is essentially disjointed or fragmentary. Everything goes together seamlessly at the level of form. I love the way that ansha is turned into a kind of chant, balanced and rhymed by examples of foreign and non-traditional speech, rendering it both strange and familiar. Ansha, Centra, Pharaoh Shah, Fela, c'est moi. When identity is finally announced, it's in French. After all, Ireland is still in the EU, I understand, unlike the UK, alas. The word ansha here then is part of a procession of simulacra that discloses, as Baudrillard said many years ago, the precession of simulacra. Simulacra comes first. It precedes the real, the ethnic, and the authentic. It's right there also in the Paul Muldoon poem that describes the roll call. No 1960s school situation ever took place when Irish was the dominant language, I wouldn't have thought. Certainly not in the 1960s. The cry ansha discloses the school situation that seeks to ground the identity of Irish citizens in a particular ethnicity associated with a past that is every day ritually brought into a timeless present as a copy with no original. Denise Chyla's song is suggesting, it seems to me, that Irish ethnicity is as much a simulacrum as a black female James Bond. James Bond never existed, remember, only multiple copies that are all in their own way original. Is this a traumatic idea? The coda to ansha seems a little concerned that they've overstepped the mark. Can we have the next slide? Yes, this is the coda to the song. We're back at it again. Oh Lord, they're panicking again. What? They're panicking again. They're panicking again because it's a shenanigan again. Wait, What was that again? It was repeated a couple of times. What is it to panic, to experience a sudden, overwhelming fear? Here apparently caused by another shenanigan going on. What's a shenanigan? I assumed it was an Irish word or an Irish slang word for a bit of trickery, mischief, or deceit. And that is indeed its meaning. But much to my surprise, when I actually looked it up, I discovered it's not an Irish word at all. It's a fairly recent American word. The first record of its use is 1855 in San Francisco. There's also a record of Mark Twain using it in 1862. Consider them all guilty of shenanigan, he writes in a letter to someone. I guess one of the reasons I thought shenanigan was an Irish word was because Shenanigans is an Irish pub that opened recently in Southampton, which is my hometown in the UK. Actually, it's a chain of themed Irish pubs. There's one in Liverpool also. Its website states that we are Southampton's only real Irish live music and sports bar. Enjoy top sports action across our 6 screens with your favourite Irish beers and spirits. To call an Irish bar shenanigan, then, is itself a shenanigan, which perhaps, in a way, makes it real, if we consider that the whole Irish thing, as they say in hip-hop, is also a shenanigan. An invention of the USA. It was also in the USA, according to Noel Ignatieff, that the Irish became white, since they had emigrated to a country where colour was important in determining social position, and they adapted to it in short order. Like the word, the American word shenanigan, this has had a legacy in the old country also, which Chila seems to suggest has also become white retrospectively. Oh, she's back at it again, and oh Lord, they're panicking again. A panic attack is usually regarded as a kind of instance of deep anxiety. According to the psychoanalyst Darian Leader, anxiety is an important affect, the most important affect, and should be heeded. Anxiety is the sign that we've temporarily lost the persona and reference points we count on in daily life. Suddenly, we're alone and in danger. In this sense, anxiety never lies. I think Chila's solution to this anxiety, to the feeling that we're alone and in danger, is to emphasize that ansha names the here and now of the present in a symbol that should be the site, the ritual site of hospitality, like it is in Camden Street in Dublin. Not just as not just as it is in Camden Street, but anywhere where Irishness comes to be reaffirmed, even as it is contested and remade. There's always a little hostility in the word hospitality, as Chila suggests in dual citizenship. The dual is D-U-E-L to indicate, a rivalry. And it's her debut statement. The pun evokes rivalry amidst the revelry of Irish bacon and cabbage and the Zambian staple dish nshima. Why not try both? Try this. It's better. In Ansha, conviviality is summoned by the spice box, another piece of shenanigan, another metaphor for her dual citizenship that in these early records is always affirmed in the form of a challenge, a duel. What was that again? Say my name. Where are you from originally? Me, originally? I'm from here. Ansha. Cheers. That's it. Thank you. And I do highly recommend checking out on YouTube the video to Ansha. I can't hear you, Noelia, so I don't know what you're saying, whether you're summing up or asking me a question.
I'm sorry. I had turned off the microphone.
You muted yourself. Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, because if I keep it on, mobile phones, everything.
Absolutely.
And landing line phones, etc. But anyway, before questions, I have to say something about you. Scott Wills is professor of media and communication at Kingston University London. He writes on literature and popular music. He's also part of a culinary art project with Irish and Edla Connell.
Yeah.
His most recent book is Scott Walker and the Song of One All Alone, published by Bloomsbury in 2019. So let's see if the students have questions. I believe they have. Let's wait a little bit more. Lara? Any question?
That's fine.
Okay? Is everything okay?
Yeah. Anybody that wants to ask me any questions or other for references and so on, just email me or put something in the chat and I can respond. Yeah. It was is from a book called Great Satan's Rage. Published from Manchester a few years back. It looks at rap metal and gangster rap in particular as the kind of the most popular forms of the 1990s. So looks at American politics in the 1990s and its sort of counter commentary and the counter commentary going on in rap and this kind of strange hybrid form called rap metal or nu metal in new. Yes, for sure. Yeah, it's very vibrant. Limerick, of course, where Chila comes from, but also Dublin.
I remember you wrote an article on goldfish memory a few years ago.
Did I? I don't think
so.
Yes,
you wrote a text. I think I had just finished writing on goldfish memory when your text I could read your text.
I think you showed me that text, that thing. I don't think I've ever written on it. No.
Yes. One day, I think when we finish, I send you this.
Yeah. I mean, I do write quite a lot I have written quite a lot over the years, but it's a bit strange to think I've actually forgotten.
Yes, it is Liz Gill's film, 2003.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. I think you introduced me to that as well.
I think the topic was on Lacan's.
Yeah, probably. I use him a lot.
Yeah.
He's good.
Yeah. Any other question? So let's close this section.
And then you've got your next speaker coming up.
Yes, we'll be moving to Sanyu because the other professor, maybe he couldn't come. We tried. We have tried many times to get in touch. I phoned him, but he doesn't have any mobile phone. The number he sent, WhatsApp doesn't work. But there is another question for you. Can you show it again, Lara? Again? Can you answer this question?
Yeah, the question was, do I that the coda to Anshar, they're panicking again? Oh Lord, does that have to do with the sort of burgeoning right-wing movements in Ireland, and also, of course, evidenced by some of the comments on Twitter, not just in Ireland but also in the UK and other parts of Europe? And I think yes, it certainly does. And I think the recourse is always to some sort of mythical ethnic content in the nation that if you're a recent immigrant to Ireland, you can't partake in. You're excluded from it. So I think that's they have a lot of fun in the video, wearing chainmail and waving big broadswords and things around, and so I think that's a satire on that kind of thing.
Okay, I have just received a message from Barry. He made a mistake with the daytime. Let me see, still have my presentation. So if there is any way I could do it for you at an alternative time, please let me know. Okay, let's listen to Sanyu now.
Yeah.
And I'll try to arrange the time for Barry. Okay. Thank you very much, Scott.
You're welcome.
In the future. And Bloomsday is coming. Maybe we'll be in touch.
Yeah,
invite you.
Yep.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye. So, Sanyu, it's your turn now. Let me introduce you to the audience. I think everybody knows Sanyu. Sanyu is my researcher. He's doing his PhD on horror films, Irish horror films, and he's finishing in a year or less than a year. I hope so. And he's very devoted to Irish studies, together with the other students, the other researchers. Sanyu was really a guy that has given me lots of support to develop the Irish studies in Bahia. Sanyu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. So first of all, guys, I think that at this moment, it's always very important to say who is funding us. So I have received a grant from ABEI, Associação Brasileira de Estudos Irlandeses. It was a 6 months grant, and it was very important for my research. I was able to buy quite a lot of books with it. And I also received a grant from FAPESB, Fundação de Amparo à Pesquisa do Estado da Bahia. The name of this paper is What Are You Afraid of, Mother? Analyzing the Hole in the Ground by Lee Cronin. It's a horror film. It was released in 2018. And it's a story about Sarah and her son, Chris. And she believes he was replaced by a fairy. And this story was inspired by the changeling myth, which is a fairy tale widely known in Ireland. And it's a very interesting story. I'm going to talk about Irish horror cinema too. But first, let's understand what's the moment of Irish cinema now. Ireland's national cinema was far from Hollywood standards, especially during the first decades of the independence. The movies were mostly associated to nationalism and the country's landscapes. During the Celtic Tiger, the state began to recognize the cinema as a profitable investment and re-established the Irish Film Board. Nowadays, the Irish Film Board is called Screen Ireland, and it's basically an institution responsible to fund the cinema production in the country. They also found TV shows, TV series. According to Sarah Rodriguez, the IFB was mainly interested on high quality projects. The purpose was to support productions different from those already available in the mainstream market. So it means that they wanted something original. The author also points out that the committee was not willing to fund films that had nothing to do with Ireland. So let's imagine that, for example, I am from Belgium. I am a filmmaker and I have a project and I want to record a film in Ireland. The Irish Film Board could be interested in supporting my project, but let's imagine that I am from Belgium and I want to record a film in Spain with Spanish actors. The whole crew is Spanish, so probably Irish Film Board would not be interested in supporting this project. Ireland's national cinema explored many social issues, such as poverty and child abuse. I'd like to mention a film called Snap. It's a film about child abuse. It's by Carmel Winters. And filmmakers, they usually explore the contradictions of the family environment. And there are two interesting films. The Delinquent Season is a very recent film, and it's a drama. And Viva, and it's interesting because Viva, it's a drama. It was not recorded in Ireland, but the writer is Irish, the director is Irish, and it was a story. It's a story about a drag queen, a young drag queen from Cuba. It was recorded in Cuba, but you can see there are a lot of similarities between Ireland and Cuba during the whole narrative. But let's talk about horror, okay? According to Sean Crossan, Irish filmmakers were not frequently involved with horror during the Celtic Tiger period, which might be related to their low budget and the lack of technical resources. And this is interesting because even now, and Ireland is going through the Celtic Phoenix period, Lee Cronin, he gave an interview and he was talking about the process of recording The Hole in the Ground. And he said that they called the film The Hole in the Budget because there were moments that they just did not have money to do what was the original project. And it's very interesting because Irish filmmakers, even though the resources are very low, they find ways to explore fear. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But I'd like to mention this review. It was written by Derek Elley, and it's a film by Patty Brathnach. And it's interesting because Shrooms, this film by Patty Brathnach, is a horror film. But Patty, he also was the director of Viva. So it's very difficult to find an Irish filmmaker that only records films of a single genre. So it's very interesting because Patty Brathnach, he recorded dramas, comedies, and Shrooms, which is a horror film. It's a slasher. And Ellie, he said that the scenes were not scary and the story was far from original. And he also said that the film shows how difficult it is to make effective horror scenes with a modest budget. But during the Celtic Phoenix, horror films became more frequent. But there is still not enough films to create a definition to Ireland's horror cinema. I'm not sure if you guys are able to see, but there is a spider, and this was a sequence in The Hole in the Ground, where Chris, he grabs the spider and eats it. So it's not an expensive sequence. They probably did not use a lot of resources or special effects, but it was very effective. Like it was a scary moment. It's a kid eating a spider. And also, Irish filmmakers, they usually focus a lot on the sound design, which gives us a lot of horrifying moments. Um, Even though Kennedy believes it is difficult to understand the characteristics of Irish horror, he says that a significant number of films are set in the countryside compared to stories of monsters in urban areas. So most of the times, the Irish horror films are recorded and placed in the countryside. There are some examples here. I'd like to mention Stitches, because Stitches is a very interesting film because the budget was so low, but the critics said that this film was going to be uh, like legendary, and people would mention this film for a long time. And indeed, Stitches is a film hardly appreciated by horror film fans. The Canal is another film. The Lodgers is another Irish film, and Vivarium. Okay. But now I'd like to talk about the family, because the family seems to be something present in many Irish horror stories. And it's interesting because the family has a central position in Irish society. The Article 41 of the Irish Constitution says that the family is the natural, primary, and fundamental unity group of society. So it's contradictional because many horror films present the family as a horrifying institution, and many terrible events happen inside of the household. So after the Great Famine, the property subdivision system was abandoned, and it was replaced with the Steam family. Basically, in the Steam family, the father is going to choose only one child to receive all his land. And this tradition did not offer many benefits to women who did not participate in the decisions and had to rely on luck to marry the owner of a farm. And this is very interesting because even nowadays, you can see aspects in the Irish society that just ignore the presence of the desire of a woman. And Liz Gale, she's a filmmaker, and she gave me an interview a while ago, and she said that it's like Bono. What other rock stars is still married to its first wife after all these years? So that's why we have to recognize the importance of the family for the Irish society, even nowadays. So let's talk about the hole in the ground. At the beginning, Sarah and Chris, they are at this amusement park. The first shot of this sequence is a close-up, okay? This close-up of Sarah's face. She looks apprehensive and watches Chris. While he's playing, she watches him. So Rick Cronin, he builds the narrative through Sarah's eyes. So it's like the film is about her own experience as a mother. So the veracity of some events can be questionable as they do not have the eyes of other characters. And I really like this shot too. It's in the same sequence. They are leaving the amusement park. She's going to the car with him. And as you can see, it's a very wide shot. So it feels that they are very isolated. So it feels that the experience, the story that it's going to be told is only about them. And Isabel Pinedo, she says that nothing is what it seems in postmodern horror. Characters might find themselves locked in a nightmare and die in their sleep. Reality is fragilized in terms of narrative and cinematography. So it can be very difficult to distinguish between subjective and objective, leading the public to keep on questioning what's reality and what's delirium. And the villain in the postmodern films, the postmodern horror films, is usually someone close to the other characters. Thus, it's very difficult to point what is good and what is bad, what is safe and what is dangerous. So basically, in the hole in the ground, the villain is the kid. And Cronin, he uses general plans of a forest, attempting to expose to the audience that the narrative is related to the natural landscape. So it's very interesting, guys, because usually I'm comparing two films. The first one is Garage, and the other one is The Hole in the Ground. So The Garage is a very sad film. It's a film about a guy. In the end, he kills himself, but the colors are very bright. While The Hole in the Ground, the forest seems to be dead. So, unlike other films that present the countryside of Ireland with vibrant colors, The Hole in the Ground shows trees with dark and sober colors as if they were dead. So, Sarah, it seems that she was a victim of domestic violence and she had to run away to the countryside with her kid, and she's taking care of him alone. And during the steam family period, women had no control of their lives, and getting married was their only survival strategy. And at the beginning of the 20th century, the population of mental asylums were increasing rapidly because many people could not bear the situation of the steam family system. And many people really developed mental issues and had to go to mental asylums. And Sarah's mental health is questionable during the whole film. She's following the path of Noreen Brandy, a lady who developed a mental disorder because she believed her son was an imposter. And this story is a widely known story. The Changeling is a fairy tale that everybody in Ireland knows. And Lady Jane Wilde, she has a short story about this called The Fairy Race. And it's like the evil fairy is going to someone's house. She's going to kidnap the baby and replace the baby with a baby fairy. And that's what Sarah believes happened to Chris. And Cronin, he seems to establish a generational relationship between Noreen and Sarah, as if this is something that is happening to many women. They can't recognize their own children, and their partners are either absent or just ignoring the issues. Sarah, she approaches Noreen's husband. She commits suicide. And Sarah, she shows evidence that Chris is not Chris. And there is something wrong with him, just like there was something wrong with Noreen's child. His name was James. Noreen's husband gets angry. He breaks the camera and say, "Oh, I don't want to get involved with this." And Sarah's asking him, "Okay, tell me I'm crazy. Tell me it's just my imagination." And he leaves the room and says, "I can't." He just ignores the whole issue. So these events, they explicit that Irish society is associated with an ideology that attributes responsibility to mothers. The father's role is comfortable, taking control of the family institution and guiding the fate of all members. And this is very interesting because Modlaski states that the recreational experience of the contemporary horror cinema does not usually contemplate female viewers. Situations of submission and fragility are projected onto women. So it's usually very hard for a female viewer to keep on watching a film that is always killing women. Women are always crazy. Nobody believes in them. And this is a very interesting part because gets into the hole to save Chris, and she meets the fairies. These are the fairies. And the fairy grabs her hand. She looks at the fairy and she sees herself. This is a very interesting moment because then she kills the fairy and it feels that she's killing herself, as if she's killing the tradition that women are always crazy. In the conclusion, Lee Cronin's The Hole in the Ground reports that horrors have been around families for a long time. Women were victimized by a model that prevented them from making their own decisions. The most regrettable aspect of the Sting family tradition is that marriage could be the only way to survive. In the film, women's sanity is questioned, but nobody recognizes their children have weird behavior. In fact, society seems to accept the idea that mothers are paranoid, making no effort to understand or listen to their arguments. And that's basically it. Thank you very much.
Daniel, you did a good job. So you are in the right on the right path. I hope I hope to read your thesis as soon as possible. I know it's a very hard task to write, but you get to the end. You will do a good job in the end. I trust on you. Thank you very much. If anybody, any question for Samuel? I have a question, Samuel. What is the common point among the films? Were you able to find any common idea or among
I beg
the
your
films?
pardon?
Could you find a common point, a recurring point among the films you've been analyzing?
Yeah, basically, most of them, hmm, most of the horror films are usually related to a very distant land. So people are traveling to a place and they
Mhm.
experience terrible situations in that place. Like, for example, Hostel, which is an American horror film. People,
Mhm.
they go to Europe, they go to Slovakia, and they get killed there. So they are not killed in their own house. In these Irish films, people are killed in their own houses, and this is the scariest element of this kind of films because it feels that your enemy is your partner, your enemy is your son, your enemy is your father. Like for example, in the canal, a father basically killed his whole family.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Because we'll be moving to our next guest speaker. Thank you very much, Sanu. Thank you. Good job.
Do you feel like there is any influence of Hollywood horror films in the Irish ones? Yeah, Hollywood films, they tend to be slashers. A slasher is basically a film that there is a psychopath or a monster that comes and kills everybody. That's basically the story. Okay, but there is only one Irish film, which Shrooms, which I mentioned during the presentation. It's the only Irish film that is a slasher. All the other horror Irish films, they seem to have their own identity.
I think after Barry, who is coming next after his talk. You can have this kind of dialogue about films because he's a specialist on films. Any
Thank you.
question for Sanyu? Thank you, Sanyu. Thank you. So now comes my next speaker, Barry Monal. He lectures in the Department of Film and Screen Media at University College Cork. He has published on Irish and national cinema from historical, theoretical, and aesthetic perspectives. His recent publications include a chapter in Irish literature in transition, 1980 to 1920, titled Historical Transition in Ireland on Screen, and the monograph, The Films on Lenny Abrahamson, a filmmaker of philosophy, published by Bloomsbury Academy, 2018. Happy St. Patrick's Day, Barry.
Hi, Noelia. Happy St. Patrick's Day. So you obviously know that expression, the look of the Irish. So far things have been a bit ropey with the technology. So apologies for coming on so late, but thank you for accommodating this. And
you came at the right time.
We'll see. So is there a way that you might let me know if my sound starts to break up or if it starts to get problematic or not?
Anything? I think it's okay, isn't it? We have
It's
Lara.
okay?
Lara is giving out technical support.
That's great. Thank you, Lara. That's brilliant. That's great. So if you like, I can start. And
yes.
If there, thank you very much. If there are any rules, just interrupt me. And if people would like to ask questions as I go, please stop me. Don't feel that I have to hold the floor for an uninterrupted period of time. I'm delighted to take questions as we go, or to stop and start, or get involved in any kind of dialogue. So what I'll do is I'm going to try and share my screen, which is a basic PowerPoint, but it should have a few clips embedded as well from films that I thought I'd mention in terms of what the overall topic is. So here's, okay, I'm just going to share screen. Now, is that visible to you?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay. There.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And I'm just gonna so I'm gonna try and work out. So that's visible as well, is it? It's still good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very good. Very good.
So this is just a general idea of where I thought I'd start talking. But it's also very open. It's very vague. Probably because of two qualities. First of all, I thought I'd talk, and Noelia had invited me to consider talking about certainly the post-Celtic Tiger period. That period which has been defined as one of extraordinary economic success, but some interesting filmmakers have interrogated the extent to which that economic success has been so successful when it came to sociological and sociocultural events and moments during the same period, from the mid-90s until the international crash, I suppose you could say, generally. So to look at the Irish cinema, the state of the Irish cinema after this time, and what I decided that would inevitably take into account was a sense of the national and how it relates to the international. So there's an ongoing development that was there at the very beginning of cinema, when cinema started in 1895, the sense that this was an international form which could be produced in one country and exported because it was containable in boxes. Immediately then, migrations around filmmaking cultures from Europe to America, predominantly but not uniquely, meant that there were international stars in silent cinema from the beginning. And once sound came in, there was a certain stratification of that. So you had language barriers that were erected with the coming of sound cinema in the late 1920s. But nevertheless, the point is that film was always an international medium. It was always one about blending stories and myths from different cultures, blending artists and collaborations between artists. And then, as I said, a certain exportability of the product. So films produced in one country could be seen anywhere in the world. And so it was really just to try and tap into that and to see what might have shifted or changed in the Irish cinematic landscape after the first 7 or 8 years into this new millennium. So I was kind of thinking about 2007, 2008. Now, I didn't want to bore you, and I didn't want to leave you without some sense of a historical background. So very quickly, just to give you a sense of the scope and the range of the time that I'm talking about and the context that leads us to that time, I draw up a kind of a chart here. So this is what I've called the historical, or the Irish state's involvement in film. And I'm going right back to the 1890s, and you'll see why, and right forward to, say, 2010. But as I set this up, just to point out a few things, here I have the birth of cinema. The date is not exactly set in stone. It's contentious in some respects, but generally the Lumiere brothers' screenings of their short films in Paris in December 1895 marks the beginning of cinema as we pretty much have come to understand it subsequently. So that's 1895. My next marker is the birth, shall we say, of the Irish Free State, 1922. And then, interestingly enough, there's the birth of cinema and there's the birth of Ireland, to be reductive about it. And then the interesting thing is, you might ask, well, when did these two things come together? When did the Irish Free State, the Republic of Ireland, first decide cinema is worth supporting? Let's set up a national mechanism, a statutory board for the supporting of film culture. Well, it didn't happen until 1880, when the Irish Film Board started to operate. It came to function properly from the beginning of 81. Unfortunately, because it was not financially successful, the board was suspended. Its activities were suspended 6 years later, in 1987, and it was reactivated for various reasons that I will talk about if there's time, if you like, but just to say that there was no official support by the state for Irish film between 87 and 93, when the board was reactivated again. There are a number of reasons why this was the case, which I can talk about again. With the reactivation of the Irish Film Board, and this is where I'm kind of going to start filtering what I'm saying into discussing specifically Irish film in an international context. So with the reactivation of the board, you had a number of Irish filmmakers, young Irish filmmakers, who were very sensitive to the new phenomenon of the blockbuster, which had been steadily growing from the mid-1970s in America, but really which had begun to take hold of the industry, this exportable, round-the-block cues, huge hit, this kind of multi-million-dollar profit-making film. This sense that film could be both entertaining and also of a certain quality. Okay, so this general sense entered the filmmaking community in Ireland after the reactivation of the Film Board in '93. And as I said, there are a number of different reasons. I'm simplifying it for the purposes of moving along now, which I can talk about again. But after this reactivation of the board in '93, I want to identify 3 overlapping phases, okay? So I want to point out 3 shifts in the way Irish film could be considered blocked from 1993 onwards. Now, I'm going to identify these with the caveat that these are very rough blocks. In other words, what I say about each of these is not going to be uniquely, perfectly encapsulated in period 1, phase 1, from 1993 to 2005. But what I am saying is that as I identified 3 overlapping phases here, as I identify them, I would say that there is a general tendency to find films clustered in this period that have this quality, okay? And the first period, from '93 to 2005, I've categorized as one in which you see again and again and again a playful use of genre. So there is a certain engagement with this international thing in cinema that we call genre. It's something that's like a contract between the filmmaker and the studio and the audience member. It's a way of categorizing film so that we understand what we're paying for and what we're getting. And it's an international language, to put it a little bit simplistically, perhaps, but it's an international way in which cinema, and not uniquely cinema as a narrative cultural form, but let's just put it in the context now, in which cinema can be traded, can be discussed, can be classified, and can be enjoyed. But in the Irish context, from '93 to 2005, what we had was a repeated sense that filmmakers were interested in playing with different genres and playing with their conventions, playing with the ways that they normally told their stories, the ways that they normally looked. And somebody could say, quite simply, the reason was there was no way that a small, localized national industry like Ireland's could possibly take on the huge mechanism of Hollywood as it had perfected genre and genre filmmaking. So rather than do that, rather than try and pretend that we had cool cops and real gangsters in Dublin, just like the ones you'd find in New York, in the films that represented the cops and robbers kind of genre, rather than pretend that, we'd make fun of that. Rather than pretend that there was a great white shark off the coast of Ireland, where people were sunbathing freely and liberally and floating into the water only to be attacked by this creature, rather than pretend that we could take that on, we would make fun of that idea, okay? So rather than try to take the genre seriously, there is often this period which national cinemas go through, which European cinema goes through, wherein genre is played with. It's not, there's no attempt to use it seriously. And this starts as a kind of a training point, or a kind of a mechanism where young filmmakers of a given nation, where the cinema isn't particularly historically deeply developed and hasn't a very deep and long history in terms of its own filmmaking, that often you'll find this, that there's a certain experimental moment where genre is used playfully. I have a quotation here from Michael Haneke, who actually stated it very boldly, far more boldly than I perhaps have or might even dare to. But he said, as a European filmmaker, you cannot make a genre film seriously. You can only make a parody. And this is probably why you'll find that genre isn't necessarily the first system that European filmmakers would dive at in order to express themselves cinematically. It's a conventional and convenient mechanism, but it's not one that is the only one available, okay? And this is just, I found an interesting quotation from Haneke himself, acknowledging that genre is so deeply embedded in the Hollywood experience, the Hollywood system, the Hollywood culture of filmmaking, that to try and attempt it is going to leave you falling slightly back upon your own best desires and wishes. However, with enough time, it's quite possible for smaller, non-mainstream, marginal countries to address genre and to engage with it seriously. It takes a lot of courage because there are codes and conventions that exist that you inevitably have to apply, but nevertheless, it's possible. And I've identified in this phase too, from the year 2000 to 2010, a rise in the number of Irish filmmakers and young Irish filmmakers who were actually making genre films, but in quite a sophisticated and serious way. And I've called this generic purity. It's not to say that every single genre film is going to be cookie cutter stuff, but nevertheless, there are certain codes, certain moments, certain regulations that are applied within that overall scheme that they call genre. And I've just listed 3 here from this period from 2000 to 2010. But we've the romantic comedy About Adam by Jerry Sternbridge, Isolation, Billy O'Brien, which you've heard about already, from 2005, and then the musical Once by John Carney. I just wanted to add, so these are what I would call seriously treated genres: the romantic comedy, the horror, and the musical, but each time given a certain inflection and a certain twist and a certain different set of artistic fingerprints by the director in question. In terms of the third phase, which I've identified as the one that I can talk about most today, but I'm moving quickly through what I'm going to say already. But from 2005 onwards, we start to see a pattern where Irish film is moving beyond very clear generic definitions and identifications. Of course, there are still genre films, but we also see a lot of films that don't necessarily easily follow or fit in with generic codes and conventions. One thing that I wanted to say, this is where I'm gonna start to have a bit of a break and show you some clips. One of the things that was really important and has kind of always been there in international cinema, but certainly is visible in different ways in phases 1, 2, and 3 here, and ones that I think are kind of interesting and that I'll offer for your consideration within the context of the international conversation that we're having now. And that is that genre itself is something that's an international set of cinematic codes and conventions, recognized pretty much with a degree of universality. And so this is one of the reasons why a nation's cinema moving from using genre in a comical way, using it more seriously, and then maybe moving beyond it, not necessarily needing to fit in with certain generic patterns, nevertheless is affected by or has certain inflections of an international quality. Now, what am I saying? That sounds very garbled, but let me try and say it more succinctly. So what I'm saying is that because of this understanding of genre, which comes from an understanding that if I want to make an Irish film, I want everyone to understand it. I want as many people around the world to see it. I want it to speak in a way that audiences will understand as well as they might in Ballycotton as they do in Brazil, okay? And so my point is that genre is one of these languages that can be internationally understood. what I want to mention as I give you some clips to consider is there are other forms of language, cinematic language, that I'm going to call cultural contact points. And what I mean by this is that international films can translate into different languages, into different places, into different cultural geographical zones. They can do this if they establish certain cultural contact points. And what I mean by a cultural contact point is something that audiences on both sides of the cultural border will understand. And what that allows both audiences from each side is to understand other parts of the story as it's built up. Sometimes these international cultural contact points are very, very heavily commercial. So sometimes their motivation is entirely commercial. It's about selling a film in Ireland, America, Canada, Brazil, and as far as possible across the global map. Sometimes it's about artistic decisions and allowing Irish audiences to see something beautiful about Brazilian culture, but giving them some in-way, some segue into understanding it. It might be something that has a traditional historical connection between Brazil and Ireland, for example, or it might be something that audiences on both sides recognize, like Patrick's Day, like Guinness, like some of the kind of icons and imagery surrounding a given nation. But let me go back just very briefly, because I've listed 3 examples of cultural contact points as they might be seen in films from the time of the post-Celtic Tiger. Now, these are not unique to this time, but they're just something that we see coming up interestingly in different ways. Now, the first is the use of celebrity, and I'm just going to give you some examples going way back to the 90s and early noughties. So you'll see Michael Collins there with Julia Roberts. We know she's not Irish. None of these characters is Irish apart from Pierce Brosnan there, but he's really James Bond, so that doesn't matter. So these are very clearly identifiable performers. Everyone there from Julia Roberts, Kate Hudson, 007 himself, and John Voight. These were all in Irish films, and they allow a certain translation across cultural borders, and I'm calling these cultural contact points. Another example is character references. So a character might reference, and I'll just give you a couple of examples. In a film, in an Irish film, a character might say, oh, I've got a grandmother in New York, or I have a grandmother who traveled to Brasilia years and years ago, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so some kind of reference that connects the Irish story to another point internationally and allows audiences to kind of nod at it and get it. The last one that I really want to draw your attention to, and then I'll give you some clips and I'll finish up kind of quickly, is one that is very important for the time frame that I'm looking at post-Celtic Tiger, and has been not absent before this time in the history of Irish representations on screen, but certainly it has come to the fore in a very interesting way. And what I want to suggest is that audiences are engaging with this kind of story, which I want to propose is the immigrant and emigrant stories. Sometimes it's just a point of contact between characters and somebody who has come to Ireland. Sometimes, as in the second film, the second film, it extends across the whole story, and sometimes it is the case that it's an Irish emigrant whose story is being told. I'm just interested in this idea of the immigrants and emigrants' stories as international cultural contact points at a time post-Celtic Tiger. Now, the first example I'm going to show you, and I have to be very careful about the time here, so I'm actually not going to show you the whole clip, but the film that I'm going to mention is Adam and Paul by Lenny Abrahamson, 2004, which tells the story about two heroin addicts who are displaced and homeless and wandering around Dublin. And at one point in the film, they actually come into contact with a man, just out of the blue, unplanned, a man who's sitting on a bench. And he is clearly an immigrant to Ireland, but we get no backstory. We don't know anything about him. And at this moment in the film, there's just a point of contact between them. I'm not going to play you the clip, but it's just interesting that there is a comparison implied between the situation of the Irish outsiders and the other outsider in Dublin, where the film is set. So the two different inward and outward examples of the displaced. This is one worth mentioning because it's just a moment, okay? Now I'm gonna move this on to my next example, which is I am going to play this for you. It's a clip from Once by John Carney, the musical, shall we say musical, from 2007, which tells the story about a young girl who comes to Dublin to live and meets a young man from Dublin. And I'm just going to show you one of the moments when they first make contact in a music shop and actually play that famous song together. This is a more affirmative connection point between the Irish and the non-Irish character. And it's rendered literally by their literal harmony at this moment. And of course, it's significant that this became an internationally successful song. And so, of course, you'll be aware of it. Now, hold on. That wasn't supposed to happen. I'll just try and play this.
I think you are not able to share movie clips because YouTube may think it's a copyright infringement and take the broadcast down.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for letting me know. So I don't know if so. What happened when I went to play that clip? Did it just stick frozen?
Maybe because you are not allowed to.
Okay, so I don't know if people.
Lara is the support, gives us this technological support, and she says that you may show images only.
Only images, that's fine. So is the image that's on screen now visible, even though it's paused?
Yes, very good.
Yes. Okay. So this, so for those of you who don't know the film, but this was the Academy Award nominated song. But what actually happens in this first moment of their musical connection? They've already met. The young man and the young woman sing this song that he's written together, and it actually, as I said, it metaphorically and literally shows a moment of harmony between them as they both sing different parts in the song, and of course then their positions in terms of the film, and in terms of the film as a serious as nodding seriously in the direction of a musical in some respects. It's not a pure musical as we might have set up a sense of the musical before, but at least it has musical numbers built into it as a moment of connections, and it certainly follows some of the older tropes and recognizable conventions of the musical, which is very frequently the conclusion, the resolution of the heterosexual romance story, which is exactly what happens here, even though it's left slightly open at the end. But that's the driving force behind what we see in it. The last film that I was going to mention was Brooklyn. And there is a very significant scene in that in which the Saoirse Ronan character, who, when she agrees to help out at the Christmas dinner, and I'll put this up, although I know I can't play it, there's a significant moment here where she ends up helping the priest who has assisted her to get a job to serve Christmas dinner to some of the down and outs, the less fortunate earlier emigrants to New York, to Brooklyn. the older men, predominantly males, shown, who at one point we're told they built the roads and the bridges, the tunnels and the bridges, and this idea that this is a different kind of representation of immigration and emigration, and one that is very complex in ways that I won't necessarily talk about unless somebody has a question about it. But certainly one of the things that I'm interested in the last two films, and certainly the position of this one, this is a softer take on it. And even though we can see the hardship, you have nods in the direction of the drinking problems of some of the men, their social status, they're being down and outs. It's kind of hinted that they've been left behind as the prosperity that they started moves on. Moves on in Brooklyn ahead of them. I suppose, nevertheless, this is shot in a very nostalgic way and rather romanticized. And, it might be interesting to hear what you think about that, or what you might have felt when you first saw it. But an old Irish ballad is sung as the men finish their dinners and their pints of Guinness, their bottles of Guinness. And Saoirse Ronan's character looks on and sees them with a slight tear welling in her eye, and then afterwards she walks out and leaves some of them. We see outside in doorways and so on. So it's a downbeat kind of moment, but overall it's representing this in quite a nostalgic way, and it's offering something more affirmative from this possibility of international connections, as I said already. And I'm kind of interested in exploring that maybe a little bit, but not when time is against me as it is now, because I see I'm coming up to the 40 minutes. So I suppose one of the things I'll just say finally is that it's no accident probably that the last two of these were Oscar successes, at least in terms of nomination, and then in terms of an award for the best song in the case of John Carney's film Once. And it's just that sense that well they are traveling, these films are traveling, they are making sense, almost like the characters within them. The contact and connection internationally, culturally speaking, is something to be celebrated, albeit sometimes with misty eyes. It is nevertheless something that's worth tapping into. This sense of universal international connection is something that is perhaps somewhat, maybe paradoxically, one that connects us. That idea of wanting to connect is one that connects us. Okay, listen, I'll wrap it up there because I really didn't want to take up too much more of your time, but I will stop sharing my screen now. I hope this is the right, and go back to where hello. I'm there. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I hope I didn't take up too much time there for you. But were the images okay?
Yes.
So they came up all right on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I do believe I think I've stopped my sharing now. So no, that's okay. So Noelia, if there's anything you'd like me to do, or Lara, if there's anything that
the only thing I think we need is a course on this subject, because the time is too short. Because I know that you could go on and on talking to.
Probably.
Yes, I know. And but there is a question from Lara.
Lara, I see. Yes. Yes. Now, what I will have to do is I will have to. There are some interesting films that explore the idea, but they're short films. Now, you can get them. So if you, what I'll do is I'll make a little list of the short films, because some of the names I don't remember immediately, and I'll send them on to you. But it's for the most part, it's not a very frequently explored subject, that idea of the physically characters coming together. Very frequently, there's an older trope from American cinema of an American character coming to Ireland and getting into all kinds of trouble, or, you know, buying a cow or doing something really interesting like that. But that kind of story is kind of whimsical and funny and comical, and, you know, you'll probably have seen the P.S. I Love You and those kind of films. But what they really do is they allow us to take a big Hollywood actor or actress and bring him to the Irish background. So when we look out on the landscape, we don't expect to see Amy Adams or, you know, Emily Blunt or, you know, John Wayne. We know they're from the films. They're not like from the Irish. So in order to allow us to understand that cinematically, we turn them into the outsider who's visiting, and then they can make loads of comments and jokes about the strangeness of Ireland and, oh, the roads are dirty, the mud paths, you know, everywhere, and, you know, the cows, and it's always grey and raining, and, you know, so we can build those into the story by virtue of the returning second or third generation Irish man or woman, as in The Quiet Man, or just some other story where the the American person comes to visit or comes to be in Ireland. Esanio's example from the horror film Shrooms is exactly that. It starts off with them, you know, coming over here to do weird things. So it allows a justification for a star in a story that's Irish. The strangeness of that. So, Sanya, I don't know if you'd like to comment on that as well.
I think Sanya has a question.
Actually, I've got a few questions for you.
Yes.
The first one, I think that the only film that I know that really explores the experience of immigrants in Ireland is Hello Daddy. I think it's the only one.
Hello
okay.
there.
I think it's the only one. I think it's
Yeah.
I also would like to mention that I wrote an article about Once, and I could not see the film as a musical, and this is very interesting because it feels like it's a love story, which went a bit wrong. And this is something interesting about Irish films, because there is always a twist. Like, we expect a twist, and if there is a writer that she's also talking about genre, and she said that when the Irish film's conclusion is kind of expected, something feels wrong. So it tends to be, while I'm watching the films, like when something it's like predictable, it feels a bit Hollywood-ish. I know there's going to be a twist as soon as possible.
Yes, yeah, that's a really interesting point. Yeah, I like, you're right about Once. It's and I suppose the bridge of the connection between Irish film as musical and Once, which is very odd to put into that category, is The Commitments, which is one which is constantly debated as being a musical, or not a musical, and what kind of musical is it? And so absolutely the same rules can apply to Once. And I suppose the moment, so I just look for moments in it that are kind of, okay, so if it's not a musical, when does it start to get like a musical? And there's an interesting moment after the scene when they're playing the song in the shop, and a very musical convention happens, which is they're singing, so they're singing the music diegetically. But then at the end of the song, we get a shot of them at the back of the bus, and the music still continues. The music that they started making continues extra diegetically. And that doesn't make it a musical, but it's interesting that it has that moment which nods in the direction of something that uses one of the conventions of a musical, and that just lets me talk about it as a musical for a short time. But also the relationship, and as you say, the romantic relationship does go. You know,
There's a twist.
How much can we say? But it's kind of like that's from what is it deviating? In other words, if it doesn't go the way you expect it to go, it goes off somewhere else. But what was the way you expected it to go? And what was that way generically? And because it does all of its stuff by playing these little musical games, you know it's gonna end like a musical. But
And it did not.
then as you say, it's not really a musical, so don't expect it, you know. So you're right. It's kind of that play with, if we tell people it's a musical, they'll go, well, they're going to end up together at the end. And but as you say, you know, that's an interesting point. Send me your article. Send me your article.
Okay, it's in Portuguese. I'm sorry.
Oh, shoot.
But I do have an article about the canal, and I might send you. Okay, in English.
Yeah. I'm shame on me. I should have learned some Portuguese before I start.
Oh,
At least I had to say Happy Patrick's Day. All these years knowing Noelia, and I still don't have decent Portuguese. I mean, really.
What a wasted opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I missed the article as a result. So anything in English, please.
Let me ask you another thing. Marco Halhan, he gave me an interview, and it was so interesting, the whole process, because he told, like, when I asked him about Adam and Paul, it felt like the whole process was multi-genre. And he said that sometimes I want the film to be a bit more like a romance, like as if Adam and Paul have this relationship, homosexual relationship. And many people also thought they had a relationship. Okay, and also, I asked him, like, why did one of them died in the end? It was supposed to be a comedy. And he told me, like, every good story has to end with someone dying.
Yeah, so you've got loads of ideas there, but the first is like there's a kind of a there's a story beyond the film about the relationship between Mark and Tom Murphy, who's now passed away, sadly. But so if there was a chemistry between them and it came onto the screen, it certainly didn't do it any harm. I mean, I love Waiting for Godot, for example, and the kind of, they call it chemistry, and it's a very reductive word. It's all biology, I would imagine. But I mean, the idea that there is something that can happen between two people that, although they start filming on day one, but when we see them in scene one, they're supposed to have lived together. And that there's no question in our minds that they have. So yeah, that's the other thing about the way it ends. I always find that the film is haunted by three men, and it's Matthew who's the one who's already died, and then there are two of them in the film, and then by the time it ends, there's only one of them left, and so there's this sense that there's a decline and it's going down. There were 3, 2, and 1, and at the same time they're just going through cycles. That it's a cyclical daily purgatory that they're going through. And I always look on the film as one where it's both a declining, atrophying kind of existence for all of them. You know, every day another one will be gone. And yet at the same time, it's a cyclical existence. And the funny thing is, if you listen to the music, which I could try and replicate by singing, but if you listen to the music, it does have that kind of dun, 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 dun,
as a funeral song.
Da, 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 da. So it has that kind of cyclical thing, but also that sense of, exactly as you say, declining, and the inevitability of it as well. So he lets them out at the end. It's not like Godot where they come back for another go.
Indeed.
They're kind of released. But Mark is fabulous.
He is.
Brilliant.
He is.
You were lucky to get a chance to have a conversation with him.
Yeah, it was really amazing. And there's a question here.
So the question, that's Fernando. Do you feel like pejorative tropes are good contact points? I feel like portraying or hinting at Irishmen as having problems with alcoholism might not be productive. That's really interesting because that's a brilliant question, because I thought about this in a very different way. And the point of, so what happens if there's an international stereotype? Is that okay as a cultural contact point? And now you start to move from questions of ethics into questions of aesthetics and representation into questions of politics and ethics. I mean, one useful thing about a stereotype is that it can be subverted. So it can be the point wherein you seize somebody and bring them into the text, but then completely overturn it. That's not an unproblematic thing, but there's a phrase called strategic essentialism, a strategic essentialization, where you will deliberately. So if I'm in Brazil, you know, in a local bar, I'll say, top of the morning to you, and my Irish accent will become a little bit more pronounced, and I might just wear a little bit more tartan or green, or not even things that are necessarily of me, things that will facilitate a link to your understanding of me, and then I'll develop. I had a conversation with Lenny Abrahamson about Garage, and he said, to a certain extent, all characterization works in a certain way, like stereotypification. And the idea is that when you first meet a character, you connect with them, you connect with that person, and then it becomes more nuanced. You know, first you'll get a gender maybe, or an age, or an accent, but then it'll become more subtle and more sophisticated. And to deny the earlier things which might be wrong is okay, as long as it doesn't prevent you from getting closer to the truth of the thing that you should get to know. I don't know if that answers your question very well, but the question is a really good one. I think that's a great question in terms of, you know, because we do have those, the Irish alcohol stereotype coming up quite a bit. But then again, you know, shorthand and stereotype are interesting things, because all characterization kind of works by using codes that allow you in, and then when you get in, you discover, like Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory, you discover there's more going on than just what it first seemed. I think, I don't know if Noelia or Sanyo would have a feeling about that.
Yes, okay. I think, Fernando, can you tell us if you understood, Fernando? I think it was great. Lara said it was great.
Mm-hmm.
What about Fernando?
Thank you very much. I was worried because then I heard they couldn't. They weren't moving. There was no sound. But anyway, that's okay. I didn't want to be arrested by your local police appearing here tomorrow morning to take me away forever.
Sanyo, do you still have questions?
No, I do have a question about, because the budget, sorry, seems to be an issue. Many filmmakers that I have interviewed have said that. Nick Kelly has said that. Liz Gale, and in different periods, because Liz Gale did her film during the Celtic Tiger period, and Nick Kelly did his film in 2017. But it feels that the budget is always an issue when it comes to Irish cinema. And I do believe this is something that I did find as a researcher, that it seems that Irish filmmakers, they avoid uh, getting involved with horror, or at least solely with horror, because the lack of budget doesn't allow them to create something extremely violent, and those Hollywoodian uh, um, sequences, like those legendary sequences, like in the Hostel or in Saw. So that's the issue. You know, do you think that the budget is something that makes the horror filmmakers avoid recording films in Ireland?
Um, I could ask you a question that you would be able to answer that I wouldn't, that might help me answer your question. And the question, so that sounds very confusing, but the question is this. It is specifically at a certain point of American horror in the late 70s and early 80s, when the technology for special effects, if you had the budget, it was going to be good. If you didn't, it was going to look shoddy. And at that very moment, and you go back to the 70s and the 80s, you have a split between films that are really there was a new rise in B horror films, and they're all the cult classics now. And they're specifically cult classics because the acting was bad, because the special effects were bad, because the scripts were bad, and because they shot under really, really, really tight budgets. There were no budgets. And I'm wondering if the time for Irish cinema or Irish horror
Has passed.
If the time is gone whereby if you don't have money and you make it, it might still be a cult classic in a few years. Because that, you're definitely true about the budget. And there are that, like, I really like Isolation, and all of my students hate it. And they just don't like the idea that a cow can go all crazy, but I love it because he made it, and he did it. This was supposed to scare you and horrify you and disgust you, and he didn't have a big budget. And I think Robbie Ryan's cinematography is beautiful in it, and I think the acting is great. but Irish audiences didn't get it. And yet it won in Germany in the film fest, and it won at the horror fest, and it won in weird horror fests all over the world. So other audiences are getting it and Irish audiences aren't, because it's on a farm with a cow. You can't have that. And for me, I grew up near loads of farms, and farms are the most horrifying places in the country. There where animals are slaughtered and machines are dangerous and fences have barbed wire prickles, and there are all kinds of things that cut you and chop you up, and farms are dangerous. So that made sense to me, that there's a horror set on a farm. But no, students by and large aren't getting it, and Irish audiences didn't. So to answer your question, I admired that he took on a genre that was really, really complicated, that you could have laughed at. He could have turned it into a kind of a mockery of it, and he didn't. So I kind of liked that, and I always love directors' first films. I just fall in love with them for other reasons as well. But I'll tell you what, there are definitely genres that they will not go near, because of budget. And if they do, you can guess how they're going to happen. So period pieces will not be Barry Lyndon, Stanley Kubrick with 4,000 soldiers all in the perfect costume. They're going to be two lads jumping over a wall in the west of Ireland, or and like Michael Collins was very daring at the time, but Jordan was very smart. He didn't pay any of his extras. He gave them raffle tickets and said, at the end of every day we'll be raffling a television, and he got everybody to turn up for the huge crowd scenes, and told them to wear their own costumes. And so you're right. I think there are genres that are prohibitive because of budgets, and I suppose it depends on the ambition as well. If you have a slighter ambition than your budget might push you towards, you might be better off. I don't know, but look, even in the middle of the Celtic Tiger, there was no money. Everybody said there's no money,
Indeed.
no money.
Yeah.
Films.
It was a
No money.
mirage. Marco Holland told me it was a mirage.
Like,
Like what?
absolutely.
Like, people are living on this. People are living in the streets. What are you talking about? That's exactly what he told me.
Yeah, I know. It was very hard to hear all of the uses of the word Celtic Tiger economy, and listening to ourselves congratulate ourselves, and then walk through Dublin where there are people living on the streets. And it was very late. The catchphrase, excuse me, the catchphrase started, "We live in a society, not in an economy," which was trying to express the idea that there are real people, not just mathematical numbers. But that phrase was very late. It didn't happen until very late. I don't remember hearing that before the late 90s. You know, we live in a society, not an economy. Our economy was doing well, but our society had a lot to answer for, I think. But that's, which is why a horror film might be a very nice metaphor.
Indeed.
You know, as you know, horror films can embody so much more symbolic and metaphorical weight than most other films.
Exactly.
They're so, you know, maybe the sci-fi as well, but horror films are, anything bad can go into a horror film metaphorically.
Exactly. And this is interesting because the critics tend to consider these films as low quality films, and this is not true. They do have a lot of relevance for the society, and there is something that's interesting about the films during the Celtic Tiger period. Most of the dramas or the comedies, they were in urban areas. They were in Dublin, but most of the horror films were in the countryside, and it feels that the countryside was the place to die, was the place of like that we should not go there. Let's stay in the urban areas because this is safe, this is good, you know. And also there is something that I do feel is that nowadays Irish filmmakers, they found a path to work and make really good horror films. I think that they are not using a lot of special effects, but the sound design is the key of these films. Like I watched the canal. The canal is horrifying. Like every time I had to watch it several times to write the article. And my husband told me, please don't play this movie again, especially during the night because it's horrifying. But that film, like they did not use a lot of special effects, but the sound design was the key to make it very scary.
Yeah, it also goes back to the old thing. If you don't show audiences, they'll imagine something far worse than you could ever represent. And so, you know, Tarantino, you don't see the ear being cut off. He just he pans across. And I think that's very true. And maybe I don't know, but if you think about at the moment when special effects got really good, so you could actually, because of CGI or because of technical effects and budgets, because of all of these things, you could show anything. If you could dream it up, you could show it. Even David Fincher, a bullet going into the head of a character, you could show anything. So the question is, well, if you show me, then I have your image of what's horrible, not my image of what's horrible. And so the only way you can keep going making horrible films to horrify people is into an extreme, the body pornography, torture pornography, you know, all those kind of things that we see where it's hostile and, you know, that kind of stuff. And Saw and, you know, those kind of. So once you get so good at it, you have to keep going. It has to keep getting worse and worse and worse, you know. But really, it's the option is there for somebody who doesn't have any money. And you're so right. The sound effects in some of those films are amazing. And like, look, if you go back to Jaws, which was Verna Fields edited Jaws, and she's died just after the film was finished. And she was a genius. She was an absolute genius. Spielberg was giving her nothing. They were coming in every day, and there was nothing to edit together. And they decided, well, let's use the fact that we've nothing to edit together. We don't have a shark working. We don't have, and that became the power of that horror. And it's the one thing that every horror director should, celebrate, that if you don't have a visual, let's give it to them some other way that'll be much more powerful. And as you say, sounds don't cost anything, and you're right, there's some beautiful examples of soundscapes in some of those films, definitely, and the influence even of the Asian extreme cinema on shrooms and things like that. Actually, I think the best part of shrooms is the sound. I love the sound design in that film. But I'm open to correction, because it's an odd one for me. Shrooms is an odd one. I like it. You do, yeah. I wouldn't be a mad fan of it, but but I have to say I do like the sound design in it.
Nice, thank you. So I think we came to the end of our afternoon, of our event, second day event. So I want to say thank you, Barry.
Thank you.
It was very, very good. I think my researchers are going to start, sending emails to each other. And
please, they can send emails to me. You have my email, and I'd love to keep the conversation going. Transatlantically in English, though. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Who knows, in the future, after, when the pandemic finishes, you can come to Bahia and give a wiki course. I'm not sure if Beatriz is also here. Beatriz is also Beatriz Kopschet. She's also interested in the area of film studies, and we can organize an event, Florianópolis, Santa Catarina, and Bahia, and then you go to São Paulo. So brilliant.
Brilliant, absolutely amazing. But listen, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Sanyo, for your paper and for your conversation, your generous conversation and ideas. And keep in touch with all your plans.
Okay, thank you.
It was really a warm conversation, and I could feel how Sanyo is happy. It was a great opportunity, Sanyo, to share, to talk to Barry, and Barry disseminate his knowledge on films for you, Irish films.
Oh, we're sharing ideas, so yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
See you another time.
Thank you so much.
St. Patrick's evening.
Yes, thank you very much, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody there.
With a beer tonight.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. Oh, so I think everybody's happy, and we finishing our second day event today, saying thank you all of you who could come here and join us this afternoon. And tomorrow is the third day, and I hope you all come and join us again too, because we are going to have 2 sessions tomorrow. We have lectures, and after the lectures, I'll be launching my book at 4:30 when the lecturers give their lectures, okay? Give their talks. So see you tomorrow. Be here at 2:00. And thank you, Lara and Sanyo and Fernando and all of you who were here giving this warm support to our event. And thank you all who attended the event this afternoon. Bye.